Okay, we can start.
Okay, so good morning, members and officers of the council. Thank you for coming along to this local review body. The first item that we have to discuss, I would be chairing. So welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. Can all attendees switch off their camera and mute their microphone when not speaking? The camera and microphone should only be switched on when you're invited to speak. Guidance on how to do this is contained in the guidance issued to you. I think you all well know how it all works now. I will ask the clerk to advise the members participating today for all those members to confirm their attendance once their name has been announced by the clerk, so that this is clear in the recording of the meeting and can also be recorded by the clerk for the minute. Mrs. McBain, shall we do that just now?
Okay, thank you. So I'll just do a quick roll call for this first item for the recording. So Councillor Stewart, can you just confirm you're present?
I'm here.
Councillor MacDonald?
Present.
And Councillor Mackenzie?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So the three of you are present for this first item.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. McBain. As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded they should not leave the room meeting during consideration of any applications. Just to clarify, I'm just chairing the first one. This meeting has been convened in response to two requests for a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the council's scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mrs. McBain, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed in the conduct of these reviews. Mrs. McBain.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Just to confirm, it's actually 3 cases. That was my mistake on the speech. So there's 3 reviews today. I'll just now read the speech out.
Yes, sorry, Mrs. McBain. I was just saying that I was just doing the first one, but there are actually 3, and Councillor Bolton is doing.
No, that's fine. I think I made a mistake in the speech, so I was just correcting. Okay. So members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process requires that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McBain. Thank you for outlining the procedure. Right, so turning to the consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the detailed planning permission for the erection of a 1.5-storey detached domestic garage at 275 North Deeside Road, Aberdeen. The application number being 200544. We'll now hear the planning advisor in attendance, which is Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description on the application, the description of the application proposal, and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out, and this is obviously an important point, that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, because he's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will not, however, be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance. Mr. Evans, are you now ready to describe the application and discuss the application that we have in front of us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If you bear with me just a second, I'll share my screen and get the presentation up here.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that now. So yes, thank you, Chair. So as you said, before us we have a request for review against an application which was refused under delegated powers for detailed planning permission for the erection of a 1.5-storey detached domestic garage at Fairhill 275 North Deeside Road, Milltimber. The review was found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The submissions indicate that no new matters have been raised, so there's nothing that wasn't before the appointed officer, and the applicant has indicated also their satisfaction that the case can be considered without any further procedure, so there's no request for a site inspection or a hearing, but ultimately it's for members to decide if you think that's necessary in this case, and we can come back to that shortly. So I'll start off just with a description of the site. So the application site's located on the south side of North Deeside Road, Milltimber, at its junction with Station Road East, and it's a large residential few bounded by a combination of low stone walling and hedging. The existing 2-storey detached dwelling house has a single integral garage and sits centrally within the plot, being well screened from the road frontages by mature trees, all of which are protected by a tree preservation order. If I flick onto the aerial view, you can see the extent of the tree planting, particularly around the boundaries of the site. A drive provides access off North Deeside Road before splitting in two as it extends south within the site. If I just go back, oh, that doesn't actually show it terribly well, but the driveway splits off and goes to both this front side of the house and skirts around to the rear area here, where there's hard standing. To the southwestern corner of the site, there's an overgrown path, which is understood to be a disused driveway, that basically just running straight parallel with the eastern boundary down to connect with an access at the bottom there. There's also an existing outbuilding, which you can't really see beneath the canopy of trees here, but you'll see it on the existing plans. If we flick forwards, yeah, there we go. So that's the existing outbuilding, which just sits to the east of the dwelling, adjacent to the wall marking the eastern boundary. In terms of planning history to this site, members will have noted from the appointed officer's report that this makes reference to various previous applications within the Fairhill property. These include approved tree works in 2014 and 2015, those applications being necessary because of that tree preservation order that covers the site, and also the approval of the erection of an area of new decking in 2014, and the approval of a single-storey rear extension and patio area, again to the rear of the dwelling, in 2015, but there's nothing within the last sort of 5 years or so anyway. So turning to the proposal, there's just some photos to give a bit of context. That's one of the existing trees that's recently caused damage to the boundary wall, which is described in the accompanying tree survey. And this is looking from the east, so this is Station Road East that just runs down the side of the site, and what you can just see behind that tree and with my cursor there is the sort of gable wall of the existing outbuilding that sits on the eastern boundary. That's just another view of the same, really, from a little bit further back within the turn in Station Road East, and you can again see the sort of scale and form of that existing outbuilding. So what we've got here in this next slide is an existing site plan on the left and a proposed site plan on the right. So on the left-hand image here, you can see the existing outbuilding adjacent to the boundary there. That would be removed. It's shown dotted by that red line there, with a new garage to be constructed. So planning permission is being sought here for the erection of a double garage to the east of the dwelling, again sited on the eastern boundary and visible from Station Road East. The proposed garage would measure 7.6 metres by 7.6 metres in footprint, 6 metres to ridge height and 2.8 metres to eaves. That's just a zoomed in version of that same site plan. So that's the existing outbuildings footprint shown in red. So the new garage would be constructed here with gables facing north and south, so presenting a pitched roof to Station Road East there. And this sort of beige colouring denotes an area of hard standing that would be formed immediately to the side of it. Excuse me. So the lower floor plan for the, sorry, I'm skipping around slides a little bit here. I'll start off with the floor plan. The lower floor plan shows space for 2 vehicles accessed via a double width roller shutter door with an internal stair giving access to an upper area marked as a store. If I flick onto that next slide, which also includes a shower, toilet and sink, as well as full height glazed doors and a Juliet balcony just along at this gable. In total, the proposed outbuilding is estimated to provide just under 80 square metres of additional floor space across those 2 floors. The walls of the garage, if I flick back here, are shown as being finished with a combination of stone cladding and render, the detail of which isn't fully specified. It's just noted as to client's choice. So if members were minded to approve, you may want to see further detail of that by way of a condition. With the roof finished in a red tile to match the existing dwelling, albeit it's shown grey on the plan. The annotation refers to a red tile. A single UPVC door is also shown in the north elevation, just on the end here. And there are 6 roof lights shown within the pitched roof, 3 on either slope. You can just see from these elevations there. A section included with the elevations demonstrates that the existing boundary wall would be, I think I've got that section here. The existing boundary wall would be retained, and the garage would be built off the inner face of that. To facilitate the construction of the garage, it's proposed to fell 7 trees that lie within the footprint of the proposed structure. A tree survey report that accompanied the application also identified a further 6 trees to be felled, 3 to the north of the proposed garage and 3 further south close to the southern boundary. If I go back to the site plan, I can perhaps show those better. So where you see these red dots, those denote trees to be removed. So there are 7 within the footprint of the building, 3 further up just out of shot there, and 3 down towards that sort of disused but to be resurfaced driveway. That's the other 3 to the north. All the trees identified for felling are spruce trees. The survey report refers to these trees being affected by wood decay fungus and also resulting in damage to the boundary wall, which you'd seen in that earlier photograph. So it is worth noting that a tree survey report was prepared prior to the development proposals, and it recommended removal of these trees on grounds of their condition and health. So they're not being removed specifically to allow for this development, if you see the distinction there. It's noted that the proposal also involves the removal of the existing outbuilding, which we saw just cited here on the left-hand image, as well as the formation of some new hard standing in its location. However, this doesn't require planning permission and so is out with the scope of this application. We're just considering the garage itself. It's noted in the officer's report that the height of the garage was reduced through the course of the application from the originally submitted 6.7 metres to 6 metres in an effort to reduce its scale and visual impact and sort of assuage the concerns raised by officers. And the stair to the upper floor was also contained within the building for similar reasons. In terms of the appointed officer's decision, sorry, I'll just flick forward a little bit here. Sorry, that's a plan from the tree survey, again, just indicating the trees to be removed. So there's 10 there to be removed in this group, and then a further 3 down towards the southern boundary. This gives an indication from the tree survey of the assessed condition of these trees. Trees would be assessed on the basis of Category A, Category B, or Category C in terms of their health and general condition. In this case, these were all assessed as being U, which relates to unsuitable for retention, so with limited life expectancy, and that's led to the arboriculturalist recommendation that they be removed. We've got some photographs here just to give you an indication of those trees. So 570 to 579, those are all to be removed on grounds of poor health, and you'll see they're obviously of some considerable scale. Just some further photographs of the same trees there. So yes, turning to the appointed officer's stated reasons for refusal, these are included in the agenda pack as part of the decision notice, but the key points raised appear to be the building is seen to be of an inappropriate scale and massing, which doesn't reflect the typical proportions of an ancillary building. Its appearance was considered to be overly dominant from outside the site, failing to respect the context of the surrounding area or the established pattern of development, and to have a negative visual impact on its established character. The proposal would result in the loss of 13 protected mature trees, which form part of a continuous line of trees along the eastern boundary of the site. And whilst it was recognised that the tree removal may be justified due to their limited long-term potential, appropriate replanting should seek to ensure the existing landscape character and amenity of the area is maintained and protected in the long term. And the argument being made there is that by siting a building here, you are removing the possibility of undertaking replacement planting in the location that might be considered most appropriate. The proposal was ultimately considered to be contrary to the requirements of Policy D1 relating to quality placemaking by design, H1 relating to residential areas, and NE5 relating to trees and woodlands, as well as the associated supplementary guidance on householder development. Ultimately, the officer concluded that there were no material considerations that would outweigh the lack of compliance with the development plan in this case. Turning to the appellant's case, this is contained within a supporting statement which is included in the agenda pack again, just picking out the sort of main key points. So the applicant highlights that the planning officer has accepted the principle of a garage and that the reasons for refusal relate principally to the scale and height of that garage. Draws attention to the size of the site relative to the size of the proposed garage, and to reductions made by the applicant from the initial submission, so referring to that 700 millimetres or 70 centimetres that was taken off the height to ridge level in an effort to reduce its impact. Highlights also that the existing outbuilding presents a gable to Station Road, whereas the proposed garage presents a sloping roof, such that the applicant contends its impact would be lessened, with the boundary wall and tree canopies offering further screening. Notes that the existing tree removals have been recommended by a qualified consultant due to their existing condition rather than specifically to enable this development, and the applicant is committed to undertaking necessary replacement planting, albeit, as I mentioned, the siting of the building may affect exactly where that replacement planting can go. The applicant contends that any alternative location within the site would arguably result in greater harm to healthy trees, and explains that the garage and upper floor accommodation is required for the storage of landscaping equipment, parking of family vehicles, and provision of recreational space come home office at upper level. Notes that achieving minimum 2 metres headroom is essential to making the upper floor space usable, but that the garage nevertheless still retains the appearance of a single-storey building. So just arguing there that there is a need to achieve a minimum headroom to make that upper floor space usable. Makes reference to exchanges with the case officer regarding amendments to make the scheme acceptable, and highlights that the council supplementary guidance does allow for upper floor accommodation within garages, provided it doesn't give the appearance of a 2-storey building or include dormers. Turning to consultations, sorry, flicked on to the wrong slide there. The local community council for Cults, Beeldside and Mill Timber provided no response, stated no objection, and there were no representations from neighbours or other members of the public in relation to this scheme. As I mentioned at the start, the applicant has expressed satisfaction that the review may proceed without further procedure, for example, a site visit or hearing. And at this point, Chair, I think we just hand back to you for members to decide if you think a site visit or any other procedure is necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. That was pretty full, actually, and explanation of everything. Thank you. Returning to the two members, Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Mackenzie, are you happy to proceed without a site visit?
Thank you, convener. To be honest, when I read through the pack, I struggled a little bit with visualizing the spatial aspects and the you know, fairly complicated way that the planner had put forward the case, and I would actually like a site visit. I had hoped, because I think it would really only require me to go to the area outside the site, although it might be useful to go into the area inside. But I had planned to go over the last couple of days, but of course, just to have a look and just to try and get my head around the spatial aspects, and but I haven't managed to go because of the weather. So if you were minded, I would like to go and look at the site and to understand from outside the site why the mass of the building might be a problem, because at the moment I'm finding that difficult to comprehend.
Okay, thanks for your response, Councillor MacDonald. I'll hear what you're saying, and I'll say what I think, because I actually don't think a site visit is required. Obviously, we're all entitled to our own view, but I actually feel within the report it is actually quite clear, and I understand by looking at the pictures and the plans what is actually being proposed. And for me, I get a full understanding of the application, so I wouldn't be supporting that. But Councillor Mackenzie, are you there?
No, I'm happy with what Mr. Evans has presented. It's given me an understanding. But I have another question that I'd like to ask. Can we move on?
Okay, thank you. So I think, so are you agreeing that we don't require a site visit, just for clarity in the recording?
Yes.
Okay. Mrs. McBain, do you take note of that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've took a note that by majority you've agreed no site visit.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify for procedure, is the question from Councillor Mackenzie all right to take at this point? I'm looking.
Is it to do with the further procedure, Councillor Mackenzie, or is it a question on the application? Or
On the application.
Yep, so we'll just be coming. Do you want to just hold off?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Right, that's what I thought. I just wanted to, just because we're doing this recording, just to make sure we're doing this all accurately and as we should be doing it. Okay, so we've agreed that, thank you for your contribution, councillors. And so we've agreed, or the majority has agreed, that a site visit isn't required. And we have sufficient number information in front of us to determine the decision. I'm just trying to look at my other screen. Right, so I think we're back to you, Mr. Evans. As members feel there's sufficient information, we'll now hear from Mr. Evans on the relevant policies and considerations for review of the application.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll just be a second while I get the right
Okay,
screen
I'll
up.
just switch mine off just to be.
There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that now. So yes, thank you, Chair. Turning to now the relevant policy context, just give a bit of background on that. So, excuse me. The application site is located in an area zoned in the local development plan as an H1 residential area. Policy H1 therefore applies. Sets out a number of criteria relating to development. Ultimately, residential development or householder development is acceptable in principle, provided it can adhere to these criteria. So firstly, does the proposal represent overdevelopment? In this case, members will note that the appointed officer in the report concluded no, on the basis of the size of the few and its ability to absorb development. Would it have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? Again, there's a matter of judgment for members involved there. The officer's report drew attention to the scale and visibility of the garage from out with the site, as well as its presence taking away some potential for replacement planting right at that boundary. So that those may be relevant factors, or you may feel that you disagree with that conclusion. Would it result in the loss of open space? Because this is a private residential plot, there's no public open space affected, so there's no obvious policy conflict there. And would it comply with relevant supplementary guidance? We'll come to that in a moment, but the relevant supplementary guidance in this case is the Householder Development Guide, which has some specific criteria on outbuildings, such as garages. So I'll just come back to that in a moment after the other policies. Next is policy D1, quality placemaking by design, which requires development to be generally of high standards of design and demonstrate an understanding of its context, linking to these six essential qualities of good placemaking. Policy NE5 relates to trees and woodlands and expresses a general presumption against development that would result in the loss of or damage to trees and woodlands that contribute significantly to nature conservation, landscape character, local amenity, or climate change adaptation, and mitigation. In this case, the officer's report placed a considerable weight on the effect of the proposal on landscape character and local amenity by affecting the what's described as a continuous line of trees running up the eastern boundary to Station Road East there. Still on policy NE3, this requires that buildings and services should be sited so as to minimise adverse impact on existing and future trees. Replacement planting potentially captured by the reference to future trees. Measures should be taken for the protection and long-term management of existing trees and new planting, both during and after construction, and applications affecting trees are to include details of tree protection measures, compensatory planting, etc. In this case, the the tree survey report accompanying the application refers to a need for tree protection barriers to be erected so as to protect the root protection areas of trees that are being retained as much as possible, whilst still allowing sufficient room for construction to take place. But full details haven't been provided. That's the sort of thing that might reasonably be required by a condition if members were minded to reverse the decision taken. So turning then to the relevant supplementary guidance. As I said, this is the Householder Development Guide. Sections setting out general principles for domestic development and also specific criteria for outbuildings are of relevance. Those general principles include requirements that extensions should be architecturally compatible with the original house and surrounding area, so in terms of design, scale, materials, that sort of thing. Should not dominate or overwhelm the original house, which should remain extensions or alterations should remain visually subservient. In this case, obviously, the garage is positioned remote from the house, so its relationship isn't so strong. Development should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example, through loss of privacy, daylight, or general amenity. In this case, again, because this is a large view and it's far removed from any neighbouring property, there's no obvious effect on privacy, daylight, or amenity in that sense. Approvals predating this guidance don't represent a precedent in decision making, and no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage should be covered by development. As you can see, or as we've seen from the site plan, it's a particularly generous view where there's no prospect of that criteria being breached. Moving on to the supplementary guidance's commentary on outbuildings. The following criteria will apply. Firstly, outbuildings must always be subordinate in scale to the dwelling house, and two-storey outbuildings will generally not be permitted. There's a question here about whether you feel like the scale of this is subordinate to the dwelling house, and whether you feel like it reads or appears as a two-storey outbuilding. As much as there are 2 floors of accommodation, the upper floor is contained within a pitched roof, and there are no dormers within that. Where a second storey is to be accommodated within a pitched roof space, outbuildings should retain the impression of being a single storey in height. So that's really just the point we covered already. And dormers will not be permitted as a means of gaining additional headroom. In this case, of course, there aren't any dormers, just the use of roof lights. Access to upper floors should be situated internally. We heard before that the proposal was altered in order to incorporate that stair to the upper floor within the envelope of the building. And outbuildings should not have a negative impact on the character of the surrounding area. Again, that's a judgment to take, and in the appointed officer's report, emphasis was placed on a perceived negative impact on the character of the surrounding area due to its visibility or perceived prominence from public areas. Next, where highly visible, and there's a judgment there about how highly visible you feel this would be, and especially in conservation areas, detached garages should be of a scale and design that respects the prevalent context of the surrounding area. Proposals will be assessed on their impact on the amenity of the area, for example, through loss of daylight and privacy, in the same way as extensions. We mentioned before that it's a generous plot and there's no adjoining neighbour that might otherwise be affected. Outbuildings will not usually be acceptable in front gardens because of the damaging effect of development forward of a building line. In this case, it's not forward of a building line, not in the front garden, so no issue there. So really just summing up with some points to consider. Firstly, zoning. Do members consider that the proposed works would adversely affect the character or amenity of this residential area as required by policy H1? Do you feel the proposal complies with the relevant supplementary guidance and its content on outbuildings and garages, which is also tied to policy H1? And in terms of trees, do members consider that the impact on existing trees, bearing in mind the findings of the tree survey in terms of their limited life expectancy of being less than 10 years, is consistent with policy NE5? And if so, does the proposal involve appropriate provision for replacement planting? In terms of design, is the proposal of sufficient design quality, which is appropriate to its context? And ultimately, you'd be looking to come to a conclusion on whether you feel the proposal complies with the development plan when considered as a whole. And having done so, are there any other material considerations with the development plan that weigh for or against the proposal? For example, issues raised in representations, consultations, planning history, or issues raised by the appellant in their submission. There's a requirement to state clear reasons for any decision, and if members are minded to reverse the decision, be happy to assist with any conditions you feel might be necessary. And at that, of course, I'll be happy to take any questions as well, Chair, and I'll just hand back to you at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. That was all very helpful. So I will invite councillors to ask questions. I know, Councillor Mackenzie, you had a question, so I will invite you first.
Yes, I'm not sure if Mr. Evans will be able to answer this, but on the upper level, they're putting in a shower room in what's going to be used as a storage area, a Juliet balcony. Doesn't seem logical. Does he have any idea of the reasoning? I could understand the toilet.
I wouldn't really be able to add a great deal, to be honest, Councillor Mackenzie. People often, describe these sorts of multi-purpose spaces as a store on a plan, but ultimately it could be used for any purpose which is ancillary to the dwelling. So the homeowner might choose to use it as a home gym. They could use it as a home office, provided it's always tied to their occupancy of the dwelling and it's not being used independently for an entirely separate purpose, like as a separate house, for example. So I know what you mean. Having a shower for a store might seem a little bit strange, but if it were used as a home gym, for example, that makes a lot more sense. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. I wonder if I can just throw in something there that I would be aware of a similar development whereby if people store their mountain bikes, they might come back very muddy. They might choose to shower in such a room and rather than going into the house, or whether it's horse riding, any outdoor activities. That would be my understanding of a shower room within the proposed application. Councillor MacDonald, do you have a question from Mr. Evans?
Yes, thank you, convener. Just for clarity, when you speak about roof lights, Mr. Evans, am I correct in thinking you're referring really to what I would call a Velux window in the roof, is rather than lights on the building that
yes.
might shine out, sort of thing?
Yes, sorry. We just tend not to use Velux on the basis that it's a sort of brand name, but it's like calling something a Hoover. When you don't do it, everyone gets a little bit sort of flummoxed. So yeah.
Absolutely, no, that's fine. I just wanted to clear that up in my own mind. Can I perhaps concentrate on the trees, because that is quite a strong element of the case. In the tree survey report, are you aware if the whole view of the house and the surrounding was covered in the report? Because I was surprised that just 13 trees, 7 on the site itself, of course, and 6 north and south of it were mentioned. But there are many other trees that I can see on the plan that haven't got any kind of tree survey information about them. Would that be the case, that it was just that part on that side of the house that was surveyed?
I'm just looking to check that quickly to confirm, Councillor MacDonald, but I would expect that the entirety of the site was surveyed, and I've just lifted out that particular section because it related to the trees affected by the development. So on the planning portal, sorry, I need to refresh my page there because it's been sitting too long. But yeah, I think my understanding was that the report and the survey was undertaken on the basis of the entire site. But I'll just double check that quickly.
Yeah, because that might have a bearing on where trees on the site could be planted if they were taken away from the area of the development. And I suppose my other query around that is you mentioned that there used to be a driveway heading south onto that kind of a back lane or whatever it is. I don't know how big that road is to the south of the property, and that line of trees that was mentioned as being an important feature of the area. Would that have been as part of a driveway, or is it on this map? It looks as if it's actually nearer to the boundary wall than it is to the driveway itself. I haven't really got a sense of how wide that is, and
What I might suggest, if it's helpful, Councillor MacDonald, I'll maybe share my screen again because there's a tree survey drawing that would possibly be of assistance here. Can get the right screen. So I'll make that full screen. There we go. So yeah, the continuous line of trees, I think that was referred to in the officer's report, is really talking about down the eastern boundary with Station Road East. And I think the way it was referred to in the report was that the proposed development and the removal of these trees would result in effectively a clearing within what is otherwise a sort of near continuous sort of landscape feature. I'm not sure if it was necessarily originally planted up to delineate the driveway, probably more so the boundary line of the property. And what you can see from this image is the sort of disused narrow driveway there that is to be resurfaced. And as part of the tree survey, the arboriculturalist has recommended the use of a sort of no-dig resurfacing to try and mitigate any impact on tree roots that are in close proximity to that sort of historic driveway. That's a fairly sort of common technique that's being used to do that. So hopefully that is a little bit clearer.
Yeah, thank you. When you mention that I think it was in Planning Guidance NE5 or Policy NE5 that measures should be taken for the protection and long-term management of existing trees. Is that only in the context the applicant would come to do something on their property, or is there requirement for people, individuals or whoever that has as many old and valuable trees like that on their property to have measures in place for the protection and long-term management of their trees anyway?
Yeah, this would only be to the extent that development is taking place and therefore it's within the remit of the planning authority. Over and above, whether we receive a planning application for development that has a relationship or an effect on trees, because there is a tree preservation order covering the entirety of this site, the applicant's actually required to seek a separate authorization for tree work where they want to, undertake any, felling or removal, but over and above that sort of works to the trees as well. So that provides a sort of additional safety net or set of checks and balances in terms of looking after the welfare of, trees of identified value in the long term.
Does
Yes.
that answer your question, Councillor MacDonald?
Can I ask a supplementary to that, please, convener?
Yes, by all means.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand, I think, whether there is a requirement to proactively look after trees on a site. So is there any kind of requirement, a bit like servicing a car or whatever, that every 10 years you have to do a survey or any requirement like that?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I think really our remit only captures this when there is a specific planning application before us, and we can perhaps request details of sort of long-term proposals for the care and maintenance of trees, but that's usually just a sort of a regular schedule of inspection. That sort of thing tends to relate more to out with residential plots. You might be talking about a large-scale residential development where there are communal areas and trees covered by factoring arrangements, where there's a sort of annual schedule for maintenance and tidying up and inspection, that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. And with your indulgence, can I ask one further question on the trees and woodlands policy, convener?
Yes.
Thank you. So coming back to the last point on the slide on NE2, perhaps you could expand a little bit on that last point about applications and what mitigation can be done around applications that are that trees are an important element of them.
Yeah, when we do receive planning applications, the sort of things we'd be looking for would be the use of On this plan, you can see the sort of highlighted pink areas of no dig surfacing, and that can be used either during construction or as a permanent feature to try and spread the load on root systems of trees where construction traffic or in the long term, permanent driveways and things are sited within the root protection areas of trees, to try and reduce that impact and as much as possible sort of balance the benefits of development to a homeowner versus the impact on existing trees. We would also usually look to have details of a tree protection plan, which during construction would involve protective fencing, sort of Harris fencing, being erected around the defined root protection areas. Obviously, where development is taking place within a root protection area, you still need to allow, usually a sort of metre or more around the footprint of a building to allow the construction to, practically take place. But if you put that fencing up, that prevents construction activity from straying further into root protection areas and causing additional damage. So it's all about trying to minimise the harm, because ultimately the council's tree policy isn't that there can be no harm to any tree in any circumstances, because we are balancing the benefits of development versus the impact on trees. And it's important to be mindful of the value of any given tree, because they're not all equal, essentially. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Does that answer your point, Councillor MacDonald?
It certainly does in trees. I have one question about whether we know whether the construction of the garage will be done as from that on that vehicles coming in at the south there and going up that hard standing, or whether they would be coming in off the main road itself.
That's not something I'm actually sure of. One thing that can be obtained by condition is a construction management plan, which you could specify that might have to include details of how construction vehicles would access the site, with the aim of minimising impact on root protection areas, and if necessary, putting down temporary cellular confinement or sort of protective barriers over the ground where root systems might be affected. So that's something that can be done where there's that sensitive relationship between construction activity and existing trees.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Mr. Evans, I was just coming back to trees. Taking up on the questioning line of Councillor MacDonald in terms of residential trees, and there's no requirement of the council to ask private householders to maintain their trees, say, every 10 years, as she suggested. We wouldn't be able to do that, would we, in any way? And also adding on to that, nature happens anyway, and nature is a great filter both for humans and also for trees. So I think we should, because so much time has been put onto trees in this application, and we obviously have to be thorough, just for the avoidance of doubt, there is no requirement of a residential property to maintain trees after 10 years or within that context.
No specific requirement that I'm aware of. However, I would flag up that there will be legal obligations where trees, for example, come to present a threat to health and safety or to neighbouring property or people. So where you have particularly large trees that are not in good condition and present a danger of falling onto neighbouring property, or there's a health and safety risk, there is a sort of legal obligation that takes effect there. But I wouldn't present myself as any sort of expert on that. We'd usually speak to our environmental policy colleagues if we had any particular issues.
No, that's fine. That's fine, and I would think I would take it as read, as most people would know. Actually, if a tree got too big or was dangerous, you'd have to deal with it. Rather than I'm buying this house, it's got trees. I know I have to maintain it every 10 years. Also, a supplementary from my perspective on that, in terms of the line that was referred to in the trees as making sort of a straight line. is it not the case that it's quite possible that with nature, that line, that natural line, however it has developed, could actually be removed anyway because of disease, and there are a number of diseased trees. And the example that I would highlight, for example, which is quite notable in the city, is, and it is within my ward, is Osborne Place, which was noted as a beautiful tree-lined avenue with elm trees. But in recent years, many of those trees have been lost, and we don't have that same line that you would see from what is noticed if you're flying into Aberdeen from the plane, that you can actually see that tree line, that it's a natural thing of a disease that has removed that line of trees. And so I'm relating that to the line that is on the particular plan. So that line might not exist by disease. It could be removed naturally. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, that's right. Essentially, the tree survey submitted identified all of these trees as being of limited life expectancy, albeit that refers to sort of less than 10 years, which isn't immediate. But yes, those were affected by, I think it was called wood fungus decay, and the qualified arboriculturalist is satisfied that those trees be removed. I think the issue from the planning authority side, the appointed officer side, was that should the applicant apply to remove these trees due to the presence of the tree preservation order, a request to remove them might be approved subject to conditions requiring replacement planting, which in the long term could provide for a particular landscape character or amenity benefit of trees in that location to be maintained, whereas the presence of a new building would curtail or severely limit the potential to do that. So I think that's central to this, really.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Mr. Evans. Councillor MacDonald, is that historical, your hand, or is that you're looking for another question?
I was looking for another question, convener, and something different. Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Evans, what would, in your opinion, and if you are able to answer this, what would be the average height of a two-storey building?
Oh, that's the sort of thing I should be able to answer, but I'm not entirely sure that I can. I know in terms of garages, we would often sort of view anything over 5 meters as starting to be a little bit higher than might be absolutely essential for the purposes of a pitched roof garage. And in terms of creating upper floor accommodation, you see that now there's a requirement to get the headroom internally, and that pushes the height up. So I think you would generally account for maybe 3 meters or 3.5 meters per floor, but that's a very rough guess on my part.
Are you satisfied with your answer, Councillor MacDonald?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, did you have any further questions that you wanted to ask?
No, none, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think that's been quite thorough and robust in questioning of Mr. Evans. So I think we're at the point now, if Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor MacDonald, are you ready that we can actually make a determination on this application? So in reading from the script, we're at the point where I would say, Councillor MacDonald, please state your decision in respect to the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision referring to planning policy where appropriate.
Thank you, convener. On this particular occasion, having given consideration to the evidence in front of us, I would be for upholding the officer's decision to not accept this application. I would do so on the grounds of particularly H1 as an impact on the scale and visibility of the proposed garage, and also on some of the aspects that we've talked about around the trees that would be lost in that area due to the particularly I think the height and scale of the garage that is proposed. So in this particular instance, I would be saying refuse. Thank you.
Thank you for, I was switched off the wrong thing there. Thank you for your response. Councillor Mackenzie, please state your decision in respect to the application and state the minute the grounds for that decision referring to planning policy where appropriate.
I agree with Councillor MacDonald for the same reason, the scale of the building and the impact it's going to have on the trees. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you for your determination. Well, it doesn't really matter what I say, I'll be ruled out anyway, but I would actually be holding the planning application for many reasons, actually. Turning to my notes, I don't believe it's overdevelopment. I think in terms of D1, it in placemaking, I think it complies with the points there. I think there's overemphasis on the trees, in the sense that there are many diseased trees already, and we can see the damage that is actually done through the boundary wall. The outbuilding is being removed and is being replaced with a garage, which I actually think seems appropriate. It's not offer privacy. The pitch roof will comply. I would say, in my experience on planning and looking at other developments, I have one behind me where I live. There's such a pitched roof that is a double garage and allows for, I'll just say, workspace, which I think that this application would do. I believe that any line that might be removed from the trees could actually happen naturally anyway. There's nothing to say that other trees will not become diseased, as clearly there are a number on that piece of ground anyway. I highlighted during my questioning the concern, the point regarding Osborne Place, and that very point that the natural tree line is lost to natural disease, and I do believe that could potentially happen. I'm actually, to be honest with you, actually surprised that it wasn't approved in the first instance, given the size of the development. So obviously I'm saying that I would have actually upheld the application for the applicant, but as already two councillors have voted against it and told the planning officer's application, the application is therefore determined. Mrs. McBain, are we at that point?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's fine. So by majority, members have agreed to refuse the application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. McBain, that's obviously, do I just leave the meeting now and hand over to Councillor Bolton?
Yeah, so if Councillor Stewart and Councillor MacDonald want to exit now, the next case will be determined by Councillor Bolton, Councillor Bell and Councillor Mackenzie for the next two applications. So we'll hand over to Councillor Bolton. Thank you for both joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks,
Jennifer. Thanks, Sandra. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
I'll hand over to you, Councillor Bolton.
Okay, hello everybody. Just for the recording, Councillor Bolton taking over the chair of the LRB on what day are we on? Wednesday, the 10th of February. Okay. Can all attendees switch off their cameras and mute their microphones when they're not speaking? The camera and microphone should only be switched on when you're invited to speak. Guidance on how to do this is contained within the guidance issued to you. Again, I think we just need, because I've taken over, I'll ask the clerk to advise the members participating today so that they can confirm their attendance once their names has been announced by the clerk, so that it's clear in the recording and the meeting for the clerk's minute. But I just remind people that the local review body contains quasi-judicial business. Members are reminded they should not leave the room or the meeting during consideration of any application. I've obviously gone through this. I know that Councillor Mackenzie, you've already done this, but just for completeness, given myself and Councillor Bell have joined the meeting. Ms. McBain?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just for the recording, if you can just confirm that you're in attendance for this item and the following item. So Councillor Bolton,
Here.
Councillor Bell,
Present.
and Councillor Mackenzie.
Here.
Okay, 3 members are present. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms McLean. Now turning to consideration of the second review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the formation of a pitched roof to an existing garage to form a store, single-storey workshop extension to the rear at 2 Gladstone Place, Aberdeen, application 200557. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance. He has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will not, however, be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development and effect. His role will be a neutral one, providing factual information and guidance only. And with that said, Mr. Evans, over to you.
Thank you, Convener. Just do the usual and share my screen here. Here we go. So yes, thank you, Chair. As you say, before us, we have a request for review against an application refused under delegated powers for detailed planning permission for the formation of a pitched roof to an existing garage and the formation of a store and single-storey workshop extension to the rear at number 2 Gladstone Place, Aberdeen. Again, this review has been found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The notice of review that was submitted in this case indicated that no new matters had been raised that weren't before the appointed officer. However, following a review of those submissions, the applicant's submission does include 3D images which weren't part of the original application, and also information relating to an alternative scheme which was apparently put forward by the case officer. Again, that wasn't the subject of the assessment or determination that's before members, and it's been provided by the applicant to demonstrate that that alternative isn't feasible. I would perhaps just ask our legal advisor to remind members of the tests that apply, the legal tests that apply to the submission of new information at the review stage, which wasn't before the appointed officer, and it will be for members to decide if those tests provide for the submission of this information and whether you want to take that into account. Thank you.
Hi. As convener will be aware, the applicant can't put new matters before the LRB that was not considered in the original determination. The matter can be raised, however, if there's exceptional circumstances, and these being matters that the documents submitted could not have been put forward to the plan, and it's on the basis of the planning authority's response to the application or comments on a representation by an interested party. So it's up to you whether you wish to accept the materials or not.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just check? Obviously, there's 2 parts. There is the 3D images which the applicant has supplied us, which, given it relates to the application, I wouldn't have thought would be detrimental. I would agree that the second part, which is an alternative put forward by the planning officer, is irrelevant and shouldn't be taken. But I would have thought taking the 3D images wouldn't have presented us with a problem. But again, I appreciate your kind of advice.
I don't think that would be a problem, but I think the second set will be, yeah.
Okay, members, we've obviously heard from our legal advisor, and I think I would concur that I think it's appropriate that we take the 3D images because I think it'll help us to make our determinations. But I don't think the second part is relevant, and I don't think we should take it. Can I get agreement, Councillor Mackenzie?
Yes, agreed.
Councillor Bell?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ken. And with that, I'll hand back to Mr. Evans.
Thank you, convener. I'll just be a second while I share my screen again here. Sorry, it's always a little bit of a delay.
Interesting backdrop today, Gavin.
Thank you. It's been getting lots of compliments. Thank you, convener. So having addressed that point, move on. In the notice of review, the appellant has indicated that no further procedure has been sought in this case. The applicant satisfied that the review may be conducted without further procedure, so there's no site inspection or hearing being sought in this case. Moving on to a description of the site. Sorry, scrolling the wrong screen. The application site's located on the northern side of Gladstone Place, approximately 60 metres west of its junction with St Swithin Street, and comprises a two-storey terraced granite dwelling of traditional design and materials with associated front and rear gardens. The rear garden is fully enclosed by boundary walls of approximately 1.4 metres to either side, and an existing garage sited to the northern extent of the view, which gives access onto Queen's Lane South. There are a number of buildings that front directly onto the lane, including the adjoining dwelling at number 2 Queen's Lane South, which you can just see by my cursor there. The majority of buildings fronting the lane on its southern side are domestic garages, whilst a number of the larger Queen's Road plots on the northern side of the lane have been historically subdivided, so there are more buildings of a larger scale in some instances. That includes a grouping of buildings which front the lane near the junction with Forest Avenue, which are associated with the Albine School, which is just further off in this direction. Within the application site at present, if I can zoom in slightly, is an existing double garage which extends across the full width of the view, fronting onto Queen's Lane South. So this is a view from within the garden. That's the boundary line there. So what we're seeing here is the adjoining property at 2 Queen's Lane South, which is a separate dwelling in its own right. You can see the extent of the side wall there and how that presents to the application property. So this darker rendered face here is the existing garage for the applicant's property. This measures approximately 3.1 metres in height by 5.8 metres deep and 8.5 metres wide. It's a very shallow pitched roof, such that it effectively reads as a flat roofed building when seen from the lane, and incorporates a double width roller shutter door. The garage is finished in a rough cast render. The site's located within the Albine and Rubislaw Conservation Area. In terms of planning history, the officer's report highlights no particular planning history of relevance. Just got a few more images to flick through here. That's just showing the other boundary and the adjoining property and outbuilding there. And just looking down the lane, so this is the application property just sandwiched between two larger buildings effectively. So turning to the proposal, planning permission is sought in this case for the alteration and extension of this existing garage, which would include the addition of a pitched roof and the formation of a single-storey lean-to style extension to the garden side of the garage, and to provide a small workshop area that we can just see there on the right-hand plan. That's positioned on the eastern boundary and adjoins the side wall of number 2 Queen's Road, which we saw before was that big blank gable effectively. This would allow for the formation of an attic cum storage area above the garage, as well as a small workshop area within the ground floor extension. The resultant extended garage would measure 6.1 metres to the ridge height. I've just flicked through. I've got the existing on the top image and proposed on the lower. So roughly 6.1 metres to ridge height, 3.5 metres to eaves, which represents an increase of approximately 40 centimetres or 0.4 of a metre from the existing garage, and approximately 0.7 metres at the rear part of the roof, because as I mentioned before, it's a sort of shallow pitch rather than completely flat at present. The single-storey extension constructed to the rear or southeast elevation, if I flick through there, just on the lower image here, would have a wall head height matching that of the proposed altered garage, being 3.5 metres, and an overall height of 4.4 metres to the highest point of its roof. The extension would measure 3.9 metres in projection from the rear face of the garage, so that's just referring to the lean-to section that comes out towards us in this view, which you can just see in side view there. and 2.3 metres wide, so that has an overall additional footprint of 9 square metres. This includes a door and window in the rear elevation and windows in the side or southwest elevation. Windows and doors are shown as UPVC on the drawings, with UPVC guttering and drain pipes. The garden side of the garage and extension is shown as being finished in Cedral composite cladding. Again, Cedral's effectively a brand name as far as I'm aware, so it refers to a sort of fibre cement cladding which is often used as a sort of look-alike product for wooden linings, but it doesn't have the same long-term maintenance requirements and things like that. The garage's gable and frontage to the lane would be rendered to match existing on the plan, with the new pitched roof formed in slate. Roof lights are shown on both the lane and garden slopes of the roof. So to the lane there's 2 small roof lights there, and on the garden side you can see there's 4 more, with 2 more serving the workshop area. Just flicking forward, we've also got some 3D images. These were provided with the application, so that's not subject of the earlier discussion. But these give a good feel for the building as existing and as proposed. So you can see effectively how the proposed garage roof will really just replicate the roof line that's to the adjoining building at number 2 Queens Lane South. And then the lean-to workshop extension is relatively modest in its additional footprint, and just leans up against the gable wall there, with no additional projection. So we've got ground floor plans as existing and as proposed, so not a lot to really see here other than the additional workshop footprint there. Again, quite narrow, just matches the projection of the house at Queens Lane South. This is the first floor plan, just showing attic or store area, the stair internal. And that's sections as existing and as proposed, so sort of shallow roof to the existing structure, replaced by the new pitched roof, and then the lean-to on the other side there. Turning to the appointed officer's reasons for refusal, these are stated in full on the decision notice, which forms part of the agenda pack. But key points are that the altered and extended garage was seen as being excessive and of an excessive and unsympathetic scale and massing in relation to the surrounding context. It was concluded that it would adversely affect the pattern of back lane development on the south side of Queens Lane South and the historic character and appearance of the surrounding Albine Place and Rubislaw conservation area. The proposed materials, referring to the Cedral composite cladding and UPVC, were not viewed as being traditional or sympathetic materials for use in a conservation area, and it was argued that these would not be appropriate in the curtilage of a historic building within a conservation area. As a result, it was considered that there would be conflict with principles of Scottish planning policy and historic environment policy for Scotland, as well as policies H1, D1 and D4 of the local development plan relating to residential areas, design quality and the historic environment, as well as the Council's published supplementary guidance, the Householder Development Guide. It was highlighted that those conflicts would be also reflected in the corresponding policies of the proposed local development plan, and ultimately it was concluded that there were no material planning considerations that would outweigh that identified conflict with the plan. Excuse me. Turning then to the appellant's case, this is set out in a series of documents provided in support of the application. These are all available via the link contained within the agenda pack. The main points put forward are as follows. The applicant contends that the proposal is modest, sympathetic to its context and consistent with the character of the conservation area. Notes that garages of a larger scale have been approved elsewhere in the past in the conservation area. Considers that the delineation between views is maintained, and that the proposal would read as a domestic garage rather than as a house. I think the suggestion is that that was a concern expressed by the by the officer. The proposal, in the applicant's view, complies with the Householder Development Guide in terms of its requirements for outbuildings, those being that it be of a subordinate scale, include no dormer windows, access to upper floors is contained internally, and it's otherwise of an appropriate scale for its context. Highlights also that the garage would not be highly visible, and the roof form is an improvement on the existing flat-roofed form, which does not result in conflict with the conservation area character appraisal for the Alpine Place and Rubislaw area. Highlights the use of non-traditional materials in other recent planning approvals, which includes cedral cladding elsewhere in this rear lane. Notes also that these materials are to the garden side only, so their effect on the wider character of the conservation area is largely negated. But nevertheless, the applicant has indicated that he would be willing to utilise render on both elevations of the building if members were otherwise minded to approve, and the materials were the main bone of contention. Highlights also that neighbours have welcomed the proposals and that there were no objections to the application, and notes that the reasons for refusal refer only to the height and the roof form, and not to the formation of the workshop extension on the garden side, which was understood to be acceptable to the planning service, to the appointed officer. In terms of consultation, sorry, I was just prematurely changing slide there. In terms of consultation, the local Queen's Cross and Harlaw Community Council provided no response, stated no objection, and there were no representations from members of the public. As I mentioned before, the applicants expressed the view that this review can proceed without a site inspection or any further procedure, but I'll just hand back to you, Chair, for members to consider that point for themselves.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. As we've heard from Mr. Evans, the applicant hasn't asked for a site visit or any other procedure carry out before determination. I would conclude that we have sufficient evidence, or I would suggest that I have sufficient evidence to carry out today. If members want, Mr. Evans can bring up Google images from Street View, etc. But if I could just go to each councillor. Councillor Bell, are you content to, or do you require further procedure?
No, Chair, thank you. There's ample information provided, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie?
No, I think it's Mr. Evans done a very good presentation. I'm happy with everything that I've seen.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Okay, with that, I agree that we have sufficient information to proceed today. I'll hand back to Mr. Evans to go through the relevant policies.
Sorry, still had myself muted there. Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen again here. Okay, thank you. So turning to the policy considerations, as I mentioned before, the application site's located in an area the local development plan identifies as a residential area where policy H1 applies, and where development associated with domestic dwellings is generally accepted in principle, provided it can satisfy these criteria. Firstly, does a proposal represent overdevelopment? You'll note the size of the plot from the earlier slides and the extent, or the modest extent, of the increase to the footprint. Also, that the officer's report didn't sort of explicitly express any concern about the increase in that footprint. Would it have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? Again, there's a judgment for members to take there in terms of what you feel like the character and amenity of the area is, and to what extent it would be affected by these works. Would it result in a loss of open space? This is a residential plot, so there's no public open space affected at all. And does it comply with the relevant supplementary guidance? In this case, that would be the Householder Development Guide and the Council's Transport and Accessibility Supplementary Guidance. I'll come back to those in a moment after the other relevant policies. So policy D1 relating to quality placemaking by design. This requires development to be of a high standard of design generally and to demonstrate an understanding for its context. So there's a common theme really of coming back to the site context, how sensitive that is and how appropriate the proposal is to that. Policy D4 Aberdeen City Council, sorry, this relates to the historic environment. Aberdeen City Council will protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment in line with national and local policy and guidance. So again, do members consider that the scale and materials of this proposal would fail to protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment, or are you satisfied that they are appropriate to that context? High quality design which respects the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment and protects the special architectural and historic interest of its listed buildings and conservation areas will be supported. So again, do members feel that this is appropriate in its historic context? Turning then to the Householder Development Guide, first and foremost, this sets out a number of general principles and then follows up with some specific criteria for outbuildings. So in terms of general principles, proposed development should be architecturally compatible with the original dwelling and with the wider surrounding area. So factors like design, scale and materials being relevant there. Excuse me, should not dominate or overwhelm the original house. So the house should remain visually subservient. In this case, we've heard that there's a fairly minor increase in the footprint of the building. However, the officer has highlighted the height and sort of roof form as a concern. Extension should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example, through loss of privacy, daylight, or amenity generally. And we've seen from those earlier images that the property at number 2 sits right on the boundary and presents quite a sort of strong blank gable to the application site. This proposal would just abut that, so there's no obvious direct impact there. Approvals predating this guidance do not represent a precedent. And lastly, that no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage should be covered by development. Again, because the plot is of such a length and size, and the increase in footprint is modest, there's no obvious concern expressed there in the officer's report. Turning to criteria for outbuildings, the following criteria apply. Outbuildings must always be subordinate in scale to the dwelling house, and two-storey outbuildings will generally not be permitted. This obviously has accommodation at the upper level, however, that's contained within the roof space. It's for members to consider whether that reads as a two-storey property or whether it's just reads as a single storey with a pitched roof. Where a second storey is to be accommodated within a pitched roof space, outbuildings should retain the impression of being single storey in height, so really just restating that point. And dormers will not be permitted as a means of gaining additional headroom. We've heard no dormers proposed in this case, just Velux roof lights in the roof. Access to upper floors should be situated internally. That's shown by the layouts here. Outbuildings should not have a negative impact on the character of the surrounding area. That's really just replicating some earlier comments from other policies. Where highly visible, and especially in conservation areas, detached garages should be of a scale and design that respects the prevalent context of the surrounding area. So that's highlighting that there would be a degree more sensitivity as a result of this being in a conservation area, but ultimately you're being urged to come to the same conclusion about, well, what is the surrounding context and is this proposal consistent with it? Proposals will be assessed on their impact on the amenity of an area, for example, loss of privacy or daylight. And that just covers the same point we mentioned before about the presence of number 2. And we also have another outbuilding on the other side at the other adjoining neighbour. Outbuildings will not usually be acceptable in front gardens, and of course we're within the rear of the plot here, so that's not relevant. The Council's Transport and Accessibility Supplementary Guidance also includes some criteria for garages from a more functional sort of road safety perspective rather than design. Notes that the siting of garages can alter the appearance of rear lanes and expresses a general preference for no setback from the line of a lane, as garages can help to maintain the delineation of these spaces. In this case, there's no proposal to shift the position of the garage, so it still maintains the delineation of the lane. It does state that a setback of 1 metre can be necessary in some instances. However, in this case, the Council's roads team weren't seeking that. It will not be acceptable for garage doors to encroach onto the a rear lane when opened. In this case, we have a roller shutter door for the existing garage, which is proposed would be retained in the altered building. And minimum external dimensions for a new single garage are 6 meters by 3 meters with an internal size of at least 5.7 by 2.7. In this case, because we're not dealing with an entirely new build garage, that's not of direct relevance, you know. So in terms of other material considerations, Scottish planning policy sets out that proposals in conservation areas should preserve and enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area, really just echoing policy D4 of local development plan. Proposals that do not harm the character or appearance should be treated as preserving it. And then next, turning to the Albine Place and Rubislaw Conservation Area character appraisal. This is divided into 5 distinct character areas, and the application site lies within character area C, which is north and south of Queen's Road, but east of Rubislaw Den. The southern portion of character area C is noted as being a predominantly residential area, comprising mostly semi-detached and terrace properties, which are set back from wide tree-lined pavements behind low granite walls. Notes that back lanes in the area provide rear garage access and also allow for very long views through the character area. Back lanes typically comprise high boundary walls built of coursed or rubble stone topped by brick or coping stones, and there are a number of garage styles and forms, but most are modest in scale and built of stone, granite or brick with low pitched or mono-pitched roofs. The garages have either slate or asbestos roof coverings and are typically neat and small in proportion. The loss of the original street pattern and boundary walls of backland development due to car parking and rear extensions is identified as both an existing weakness and a future threat to the character of this conservation area. Identified threats also include unsympathetic development that does not reflect or relate to the character of the conservation area and unsympathetic development of large residential garages. So just in terms of summing up for the decision making, first and foremost, zoning. Do members consider that the proposed works would adversely affect the character and amenity of this residential area as required by policy H1? Do the proposed alterations accord with the relevant supplementary guidance and its content on domestic garages, which also is tied back to policy H1? In terms of the historic environment, do you feel that the proposed works preserve or enhance the character and amenity of the conservation area as required by national and local policy? And in terms of design, do you feel that the proposal is sufficient design quality and is appropriate to its context? So ultimately coming to a conclusion on whether you feel this proposal complies with the development plan as a whole, and then whether there are any other material considerations weighing for or against. I'm happy to assist with any questions, or if members are minded to reverse the decision with the application of any conditions. I'll just hand back to you there, Chair.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Evans. Questions from Mr. Evans? Oh, Councillor Bell.
Thank you, yes, I have a couple of questions. And I'm hoping just to look at the context, but also to look at one particular aspect of the applicant's case. So if you look at page 91 of the applicant's submission, he's actually stated, highlights that neighbours have welcomed the proposals and there was no objection to the application. I just wanted to check how accurate that statement was, because as far as I could see, there were 12 properties notified, no objections, but similarly, there was no support.
Yeah, my understanding, Councillor Bell, is that there were no representations received either for or against the proposal. So, you know, we don't really have anything to corroborate that sort of sense of welcome from local residents. But
yes, that's what could I now look at the context, please? The area. I know you're a dab hand at Google Street View, Mr. Evans. So, could we look at first of all the Gladstone place and then just kind of fly around the area? Is that possible?
Yeah, would you like to look at Gladstone Place itself at the frontage, because that might be of less relevance? Yeah. Okay.
Well, that kind of sets the context for just the general area, though, doesn't it?
Would you like a looking down on it view, Councillor Bell? I don't know what it's called. An aerial view, that's the word.
Yeah, an aerial view, bird's eye view.
I can start with that, yeah.
Yeah.
2 seconds, bear with me. So that's the aerial view from Google. We also have the council's own mapping system, which is a little bit clearer sometimes. Not in this case, I'm afraid.
If you actually look at street level, though, that would be quite useful. So I know you showed some pictures, but I'm just interested in the Gladstone Place side.
So if I've got my bearings right, I think that's just number 2 right at the front of here. So that sort of tallies with the sort of tree-lined avenues that the conservation area character appraisal was referring to. I suppose the strong features standing out when you're looking up the street here are the bay windows, the granite frontages, and dormer windows, primarily on the left-hand side in this particular stretch.
So can you sort of turn the view around, and we then look to the right of the property? Yeah, that's it. That's it. So what's I see that structure in an adjacent garden. Yeah, it's by the white car. So that's in a different property, is it?
It is, yeah. Okay,
so that kind of sets the scene, doesn't it? Really. That's just been plonked there. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that application site, Councillor Bell?
Yes, I'm just looking at context. Councillor. Right, okay. Could we look at the Queen's Lane? Yeah.
Is that you, Gavin, with the bag?
Not nearly as fashionable and youthful as that. So this is the applicant's property just on the right-hand side here, and then you'll see in the background number 2 Queens Lane South, which is a separate dwelling. It's not a garage. I can turn around and look back up the other side of the street. I suppose you'll note the generally fairly low level of garages in this particular stretch, but I'm sure there are larger examples.
Yes.
Further up the street.
Yeah, that's super. Thank you.
No problem.
You got some more questions, Councillor Bell?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mackenzie, have you got any questions for Mr. Evans?
No, thank you. I think you covered it all very well.
Okay. In accordance with the procedure note, obviously we've had questions from Mr. Evans. We're now going to discuss the merit application and determine it. Councillor Bell, do you want to start, or I'm happy to kick off, whatever.
Yes, I can start. Okay. So as far as I can see, that the area is probably going to be enhanced with this development. So I think that's policy H1, isn't it? So similarly, D1 policy and placemaking would be improved. I really can't see that the officers that the relevance of the overdevelopment. I don't think it is overdeveloped. The footprint, I think, was increased by 9 square meters, which is fairly minimal. The roof height was actually increased by, was it 400 centimeters? No, 40 centimeters. Sorry, which isn't a great deal. I really can't actually see the reason for this refusal, to be honest.
Yeah. Gavin, do you want to say something?
Bell, it was maybe just to chime in on a couple of those points. I don't think the appointed officer did actually conclude that this represented overdevelopment. I think the issue was more in terms of scale, height, and visual appearance as opposed to overdevelopment. And oh, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought there. What's the second point?
Architectural compatibility.
Sorry. Yes, it was the increase in height. The 40 centimetres that was referred to wasn't the difference between the existing height of the roof and the proposed height of the roof. It was just the height to wall head level, which is where the roof meets the wall, or to eaves.
Right. Okay.
So the overall height of the pitched roof, when you consider the pitched roof section, is considerably more. Hope that's okay. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Bell, is there anything else you want to add at this stage?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mackenzie.
No, I don't have any questions. I'm happy with everything.
Okay, but in terms of, we're obviously determining the application. Is there anything you want to add at this stage, or do you want me just to go ahead and give my views?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. We've heard a lot about H1, D1, D4, the fact it's in the conservation area. If we look at Queen's Lane, we can see there's a considerable amount of different styles, from large car parks on one side to flat roofs to pitched roofs. I mean, the adjoining property, obviously a pitched roof, is actually a house. And I noticed when we went to the front elevation, there was sort of a garage which would potentially, although it was in their back garden, because it was onto a main thoroughfare, it was also kind of, if you like, a street face. So there's lots of different styles in this area, and we've heard even from the conservation appraisal that there is a level of weakness. And now I know that what we need to do is to try and preserve and enhance. And I would kind of go with Councillor Bell on the fact that I think this actually wouldn't detract from the character or harm the character of the conservation area. I think what we've got to look at is the materials, perhaps, when we come to a final determination. I think as well, I've always said, and I'll continue probably to say, that what we want to do is make sure that our granite heritage and houses have a future, and to make sure that they are adapted in a sensitive way to modern day living. And I think COVID, if nothing else, has probably emphasised the need for space for people to work at home. And I think this actually replicates a very good opportunity for that type of home working environment, and making use of what I would say is a historical property. Now it's in the garden, so it's not actually affecting the main house itself. I don't think, if you look at it, I think it does comply with the supplementary guidance on outhouses. I think it does comply with supplementary guidance on transport and accessibility. D1, which is quality of design, it's always in the sort of, I think, to level personal interpretation of what makes a quality design. I know that there's certain principles that should be established, and I don't think that it really jars with any of those. I think my only concern would be, and I think it would be something I'd want to condition, would be the materials. I don't think the massing of it is a particular concern, and as I say, I think it doesn't interrupt the long views of Queen's Lane. For me, I appreciate what we're trying, that we have a duty to maintain the character of the conservation area. But I think in Queen's Lane, there's such an array of styles and designs that I don't think this, in my view, which is a reasonable change, given that it's going to abut an already which will be of a similar height on one side and a slightly lower pitch roof on the other, will be detrimental. And I think the workshop, almost replicates the old style outhouse buildings that you would see in some of these granite house gardens. So for me, I would be minded to overturn the officer's recommendation, but with a condition around the materials. And again, I would want to just get clarification from Mr. Evans if there's anything else that he felt would be necessary. Councillor Mackenzie, obviously, as I say, Councillor Bell and I have kind of given our views on the determination. Is there anything you would like to add at the stage before we go to kind of, I suppose, a vote on it?
No, nothing at all, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bell, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for providing a very good summary, Lena. No, I don't think I would add anything else. And as you say, it really is the materials that should be looked at. Could I just ask one question, please, at this stage?
Sure.
So, cedral composite cladding. Could I just have a description of exactly what cedral composite cladding does and is?
Mr. Evans?
I wouldn't purport to be an expert in the field, but my understanding is it's a sort of composite cladding formed of a fibre cement board. I think the cases where I've seen it used in the past, it's usually been as a sort of an alternative that seeks to replicate the appearance of a sort of wooden lining, so like sort of lap timber cladding kind of thing, but you know, it doesn't have the same propensity to rot or weathering, that sort of thing. In terms of just picking up on a point that was made about the use of conditions, members may want to consider whether you feel that cladding product was acceptable, because the applicant did volunteer that they would be willing to use render on both sides, but obviously it's within the garden, so there is a debate to be had about the extent to which that actually affects the wider conservation area. So just flag that one up.
Okay, Mr. Evans, could that be, obviously, we are aware that that it was something that was raised by the officer. I suppose we would, if we put in a condition around materials, would that give you enough scope to be able to determine if you thought that it was obviously seeing samples of it, if it was the right product? Because clearly, I think that's the biggest concern for us as councillors, is that the right materials are used, because that can obviously, regardless of the shape of the building, it can retract quite dramatically if it's the wrong thing put. And I accept it's internal, but again, we would be guided by yourself as the expert.
I think in terms of the use of a condition, we would probably need a clear steer from members about whether you felt that cedral cladding was acceptable or not. To put on a condition that required materials to be agreed and leaving it at that, I think it would be seen that the local review body was effectively endorsing the use of the cedral cladding, and it was just a matter of agreeing the specification, colour, whatever else. So I don't think it would necessarily be appropriate to leave that open to officers to almost revisit the decision that's taken today by members in terms of whether or not it is acceptable. I think that's something you would need to decide.
Okay. Can I maybe ask you, Mr. Evans, just to repeat the element or the section that the case officer gave just on that particular point? Because there was reference to it not being appropriate, I think.
I'll just go back to the reasons for refusal and see if I can pick that out. Yeah, so the cedral composite cladding and UPVC, albeit I think the UPVC was used on the windows and guttering and things like that, were not viewed as being traditional or sympathetic materials, and therefore wouldn't be appropriate in the curtilage of a historic building or conservation area. So that was the view taken by the appointed officer.
Okay. Now, you've obviously made reference to, if we didn't want the cedar, that the applicant has said that they're happy for it to be render. They obviously didn't make any reference to the new PVC, which is, again, is that just on the internal elevations that it's being used? Well, you know what I mean, to the garden.
Yeah, I think the guttering would certainly be to the lane as well. Yeah. So there's PVC guttering to the lane, although it's just that sort of short stretch, and a downpipe as well. There's because of the sort of roof plan and the sort of interaction between the workshop and the garage. There's more guttering and things going on to the garden side, and all the windows and things are contained in the garden elevation, with the exception of the Velux roof lights. You might want to consider, I suppose, agreeing the specification of those roof lights, because companies do conservation specific products which are generally lower profile and more sort of akin to a traditional roof light in a slated roof. So you might want to consider that also for a condition.
Okay. Well, I would certainly be moving to, as I say, overturn the officer's recommendation with the conditions on material and also a wording. I think we should remove the what do you call it? Cladding, I suppose, is a slightly more rounded word. In the internal, I think, and leave it to the render as it. And again, what I would like to have seen, and again, I'll take your guidance on this, Mr. Evans, is on the external portion, i.e. onto the lane, that they use traditional guttering, because I think it's important, because that's the elevation viewed by the public. So again, I would take your guidance on whether that's appropriate. And then obviously the skylights, again, I would suggest that they should be of traditional, again, using the words that you had suggested in terms of trying to use it, sort of elevate the whole design to have consideration to its context, particularly on the street facing section.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the guttering specification, I'm not entirely sure what options would be available. I mean, on a traditional building, you might see cast iron guttering, whether that would be, wholly appropriate in the context of what is evidently a fairly modern, double opening sized garage. There's perhaps a bit of debate there, and the extent to which PVC guttering would be harmful to the character of the conservation area, I'm not entirely sure. You could leave it to officers to agree the detail, but they would need some kind of steer about what the LRB was looking for and what you felt was appropriate or not.
I think it's just the fact that I was trying to remember what was on the adjoining house in terms of the guttering they had there. But again, I don't think it was particularly clear from the picture or the Google Maps that we looked at. I don't think can you zoom in closer?
I'll just have a little look. Sorry, my little Google man is around the other side of the property now.
Don't worry, I'm hopeless with it. I end up in a different street altogether usually.
Yeah, you can actually get quite close. I'll share my screen on Street View, and it looks to me that that's probably, well, it's certainly not cast iron guttering. It looks like it's most likely UPVC. Not always possible to be 100% certain, but yeah, I think the options are usually sort of UPVC or some sort of powder coated aluminium type finish, which is a sort of halfway compromise between the two.
Yeah.
But that I think looks to be UPVC. And
can you, if you go past the garage, just have a quick look. I don't think the other ones have anything on, do they? Yeah. They obviously, doesn't have anything. I mean, what it will be about trying to keep it in keeping with the adjacent, so that there is some kind of replication, so that it gives us a certain continuity to the street frontage. I don't know if there's anything, would that, if we just ask for obviously specifications to be provided to officers on the guttering to the Queen's Lane, would that be enough, Gavin, or?
I think it could be. I think, officers would need to act reasonably in light of the review body's decision. So I don't think they would be looking for anything that, fundamentally undermined the decision taken today.
If we could put a form of words together on that, and I think, as you say, you needed a direction, read the sort of the cladding, and I think to return it to the render proposal, I think would be more appropriate for the internal as well, just for a level kind of consistent materials.
Okay, I think what I would propose to do then, Chair, is that following the meeting, I can just circulate some wording amongst members to make sure that you're agreeable and it's reflecting the decision.
Yeah, no, I think that would be helpful. Obviously, we just need to get a consensus of a view. Ms. McBain, do you want to just do a vote round the members just to make sure that we're all of similar?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So if members just want to note for the recording if they're happy to approve the application in line with that conditions or refuse the application. So Councillor Bolton?
Approve.
Councillor Bell?
Approve.
And Councillor Mackenzie?
Approve.
Okay, so by unanimous decision, the application will be approved with the specified conditions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. If we could now turn to the consideration of the third review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a single-storey extension to the side and formation of a carport, garden room, gyms at Highfield, Brownstone Road, Aberdeen, application 200265. We will now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he has not been involved in earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will not, however, be asked to express any views of the merits of the proposed development, and in effect his role will be neutral, one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Over to yourself, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just share my screen here. There we are. Thank you. Yes. So before us, in this case, we have a review against a decision to refuse an application under delegated powers for the erection of a single-storey extension to the side and formation of a carport and garden room / gym at Highfield, Borrowstone Road, Aberdeen. The review has been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. Members will note that the notice of review in this case stated that new matters have been raised that weren't before the appointed officer. Those relate to the applicants having contacted Transport Scotland following determination of the application on the basis that the trees affected by the development on adjoining land are in Transport Scotland's ownership. The LRB submissions therefore include correspondence from Transport Scotland confirming their view that the trees do not represent a danger to the house at Highfield. And the applicants have also included an updated drawing, which, although not in front of the officer, was stated to be the drawing on which the supporting tree reports, information and drawings were based on. This updated drawing repositioned the garage extension forward by 1 metre to reduce impact within the existing trees zone of influence. The slide presentation that I've got here shows the approved plan that was considered by the officer rather than this updated version. But I suppose what's being pointed to there is that there was in the package of information before the appointed officer, there was a contradiction or an inconsistency in terms of the position of the outbuilding. So that's a little bit tricky in that the decision taken has been taken on the basis of 2 drawings that say different things. You might argue that the plan itself, the site plan, would take precedence and that the tree submissions are sort of supporting evidence to accompany that rather than representing the proposal itself. But I'll maybe just hand over to our legal advisor again just to remind us of the tests, the criteria for new information or new matters being raised at this stage.
Hi, yeah, again, no new information should be brought forward if it wasn't in front of the original determination, unless they could demonstrate that it was a matter that they couldn't show before it was based on the officer's comments or comments made by representations by interested parties. So, Councillor Bolton, you're on mute.
think a lot of people would like me on mute, Ken. It was just, can I get clarity? Because my understanding from what Mr. Evans said was that it was only on the publishing, perhaps, of the officer's report that the applicant felt he had to seek clarification on a point with Transport Scotland, re the trees. Can you maybe just confirm if I've understood it correctly, or if, because if that's the case, it's not really introducing new information, it's just more about clarifying a point, and that's where I'm struggling a little bit.
Yeah, but also if it's not new information as such, they are allowed to put in information that is being brought up by the officer's comments on the determination anyway, so that should be okay.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I feel that I don't think there's anything new being considered. I think it's just a clarification. It's only been brought up because of comments in the officer's report. So I'm quite comfortable that we could actually accept this information. Are you comfortable as our legal advisor?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Cam. Councillor Bell, are you happy to accept it?
Yes, I think there's more than enough.
Councillor Mackenzie, are you happy to accept extra information?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Mr. Evans. We'll pass it to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm, there were two elements to that new information. There was the supporting correspondence from Transport Scotland, which members are satisfied, was sought as a result of the appointed officer's decision. There's also the updated drawing. So am I right in thinking members are satisfied to accept the updated drawing on the basis that it corrects that contradiction that existed previously? That's fine. Thank you very much. I'll just get the presentation back up here. Right, thank you. So having dealt with that matter, can now move on. The applicant in this case has also expressed satisfaction that the case can be considered without further procedure, so there's no request for a site inspection or hearing. Brief description of the site. The application property is located approximately 70 metres west of the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route, roughly 550 metres north of the Kingswell South AWPR junction, which is just off the screen here to the south. The site's located in a broadly rural area which forms part of the designated Greenbelt and Green Space Network designations in the local development plan. To the north is the Three Hills Local Nature Conservation Site. While the surrounding area is largely open countryside, there are two further dwellings located approximately 50 metres to the south, those being West Hatton and the Bothy, beyond which lie agricultural fields. The site's accessed via a private road, which is shared with these two other properties, which leads to the Highfields' own driveway, which we can just see branching off here. To the west of the site lie further agricultural fields, and there are mature trees along the north and west boundaries of the site, which you can perhaps see better from an aerial view. So just trees along those boundaries. The existing property at the Highfield comprises a detached bungalow with detached double garage set in the eastern corner of the large residential plot, which exceeds half a hectare. Both the dwelling and the garage are of a relatively modern design, finished in render and fifestone with a red tiled roof. The dwelling's been previously extended with a conservatory added to the south elevation. I've got some photos of the existing property here. So this is the existing garage. It's front elevation. It's not directly affixed to or adjoining the house itself. It's entirely freestanding. And so that's showing the garage in the background, and then this is the gable of the house. So this is the location of where the property would be extended out. And the extension to the garage would be on the far side, so in the background. That's the existing and proposed site plans. So what you can see is the extension to the property coming out from this portion here, and then the existing garage being extended on its western side there. Just a sort of more full description of that. The application proposes a single-storey extension to the north or side elevation to the property, and the construction of a new garden room cum gym and double width carport affixed to the existing double garage. There are some existing and proposed elevations just to take you through. So this is the existing property in the top image, and then you can see the extension, which sort of replicates the roof form and materials of the existing property. Incorporates a hipped roof bay window, excuse me. So then the rear elevation is just essentially the same, but without the bay window. And the side elevation, you can just see that bay window stepping out. So the single-storey extension to the northern elevation would project 5.6 metres from the existing sidewall, extends across the full depth of the house of just shy of 9 metres, and would provide an additional bedroom, walk-in wardrobes, and 2 en-suites. I'll just move forward to floor plans so you can see that. So the area in yellow is the additional floor space resulting from the extension. The western or front elevation, as we saw, includes a hipped bay roof window with further small windows in all elevations. Finishes include fife stone, which is a sort of synthetic aggregate product made of granite, but sort of reformed, rough cast or harling, and concrete roof tiles to match the existing dwelling. The proposed carport and garage, garden room cum gym, would be separate from the house but affixed to the existing double garage, the carport measuring 6 metres wide, so that central portion, by 7.2 metres deep, with the garden room cum gym measuring 6.1 by 7.2. The garden room cum gym would have a pitched roof, which you can just see in elevations, excuse me. So that's the front elevation of this. Finishes include vertical timber linings for the walls and concrete tiles to match the existing roof of the garage. Full height windows would be integrated in the south side and the front elevation. So that's the front elevation with full height glazing. And that's the side with full height glazing again. Should have a floor plan as well. Sorry. There we go, sorry. So the existing garage, carport exposed, and then the gym cum garden room with the full height glazing looking out. So we've got some visuals that have been supplied as part of the application. I've just taken these individually on the next slide so you get a clearer view. So this is as proposed. So what we're looking at there is the extension with the bay window added, that far view. And then we've got the existing garage. So the line of the roof just extended out to provide a covered carport area. And then this is the garden room with full height glazing incorporated there. In the second image, just showing the same thing from a different angle really. So you can see the front elevation of the house better and see how that fits together. And then this one just shows the side elevation again with the full height glazing to both the sunroom and our garden room in the right hand side there, and the gym in the left hand side. We also have a tree survey and associated appendices. So turning to the schedule, you'll note from this that the surveyed trees are a mix of category A, B and C specimens. No trees are proposed for removal to facilitate development, so there's nothing actually coming away. What's at issue is really the impact on root protection areas and the encroachment into zones of influence to the extent that might result in trees being perceived as a threat to property in future. So there are also no trees being recommended for removal on grounds of health or condition. They're all assessed as being currently healthy and not in need of removal. The survey plan on this next image notes the position of the trees relative to the property in the garage. So you can see on this the smaller circles relate to category A, B and C trees, and then the larger blue line and green line denote the tree canopy and the root protection area. So you can see that there's a degree of closeness between the root protection areas and the house, and there is actually some overlap where the garage is. And then on the next slide, that shows how those relate to the proposed works. Obviously, the extension brings that closer to the root protection areas and canopies of these existing trees. As you can see, highlighted in pink there is where there's overlap, and that reflects encroachment into root protection areas and potential harm. On this plan, a smaller area. The orange reflects a zone of influence, which extends further than root protection or canopy areas. It's effectively a theoretical area within which trees may be affected indirectly by development due to being perceived as a threat to buildings, for example, which can lead property owners to seek removal in future. So the use of the zone of influence in planning assessments comes from our supplementary guidance on trees, and the intention is to avoid scenarios where development results in trees being perceived as a threat and then there being later pressure for removal. It's worth noting in terms of root protection areas that roots can also be affected by construction activity around trees rather than just the footprint of development, because you obviously still need to get in to carry out the construction work there. So on this fourth image, this orange hatched area you'll see refers to a cellular confinement system, which is effectively, as we mentioned in the first case today, a way of spreading the load across those root systems and trying to minimise the harm that would be done as a result of the construction works. The pink line on this plan reflects tree protection fencing that would be erected to ensure that, whilst it would be recognised that there would be a degree of impact from construction works, it would be contained within that minimum area necessary to carry out the construction works, and wouldn't just allow for vehicles or materials to be stored or loaded in a way that would affect other trees. So just moving on to the reasons for refusal. The appointed officer's reasons, again stated in the decision notice that's in the agenda pack. Key points include, firstly, that the proposal would result in significant impact on the root protection area of 5 mature beech trees. These are recognised as being out with the site in different ownership. Would also result in significant encroachment within the zone of influence of 7 further mature beech trees, which again are out with the site and in different ownership. The officer concluded that this would be contrary to policy NE5, trees and woodlands, and the associated supplementary guidance, and highlighted conflict with the corresponding policies of the emerging proposed local development plan. In this case, no material considerations were identified that would warrant determination other than in accordance with the development plan. The appellant's case, again, contained within a supporting statement included in the agenda pack, but the main points are, firstly, to highlight that the appeal turns on conflict with one policy, ultimately, policy NE5 relating to trees and woodlands. The reason for refusal does not specifically say what's unacceptable about the proposal in terms of the information which was provided to assess and mitigate root protection areas, impact on root protection areas and zone of influence. Contends that there is no conflict with policy NE5 or the associated supplementary guidance, as impacts on the root protection areas and zone of influence have been adequately addressed and appropriate mitigation proposed. The house, garage and part of the garden are already located within the root protection area and zone of influence of some of these trees, and those haven't been adversely affected by that. And the proposed extension would not have a considerable or significant impact on trees in the view of the applicant. There's no alternative location to locate the required extensions on the ground floor. The layout, siting and design of the proposal is viewed as being otherwise acceptable, as is the development in all other respects. And Transport Scotland, as we've seen from the correspondence provided, have advised that the trees are not a safety concern in their view, and therefore there's no need for their removal as a result of the applicant's proposed development. Transport Scotland would ultimately be responsible for monitoring, managing and maintaining their trees as necessary to maintain their health. And lastly, concludes the Aberdeen City Council's inflexible approach to the development to development which is within the root protection area or zone of influence of trees is inconsistent with current British standards, and insufficient regard has been given to the mitigation that's been put forward by the applicants. In terms of consultation, the local Kings Wells Community Council offered no comments on this application, and there were no representation from neighbours or members of the public. As I mentioned before, the applicants expressed satisfaction that the review may proceed without further procedure being required, for example, a site inspection or hearing, and at that point, Chair, I'll just hand back to you for members to consider that point further. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Questions from, sorry, first of all, are you satisfied you've got sufficient information in front of you to determine the application today, Councillor Bell, bearing in mind obviously that the applicant hasn't requested any further procedure?
Well, I would need some clarification for some of the drawings, but yes, there is sufficient information there, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie.
Yes, I believe there is sufficient information being presented.
Okay, again, I'm content with the information within the pack. So we'll just proceed, and I'll pass back to you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Convener. There you go. So turning to the relevant policy background, as I mentioned before, the site's zoned as both Green Space Network and Green Belt. In terms of the Green Space Network policy, NE1 requires that Aberdeen City Council will protect, promote and enhance the landscape value of the Green Space Network. Proposals that are likely to destroy or erode the character and or function of the Green Space Network will not be permitted. And development which has a negative impact on existing features of value to natural heritage, open space, landscape and recreation should be mitigated through enhancement of the Green Space Network. In this case, policy NE1 wasn't highlighted in the officer's decision as being central to the refusal. I think I can perhaps show on a plan just the extent of the Green Space Network, just for some context. So this is the property at the Highfield, if you can see that there. And if I put the Green Space Network overlay from the council's mapping system over the top of that, you can see that it's a much wider area which provides connection for habitats and things. So the Highfield site really sits in the middle of that, and it's obviously a domestic curtilage. So any impact that there might be on a number of trees needs to be seen in that wider context. Oh, sorry, I think I've stopped sharing my screen instead of just going back to the other window there. There we go. Sorry about that. So moving on to Green Belt. The local development plan sets out that development will not be permitted in Green Belt areas unless essential for the purposes listed here. Moves on in the later part of the policy to set out a number of exemptions or exceptions to that general restriction, the first of which provides for small-scale expansion of existing uses in the Green Belt. Obviously, this is a residential curtilage, and what we're talking about is a domestic extension and construction of a domestic outbuilding, so there's no intensification by way of sort of subdivision of a plot or introduction of additional dwellings in that sense. So in that sense, the officer hasn't made issue with conflict with policy NE2 and has concluded that the domestic extension and outbuilding would be small scale consistent with NE2. Policy NE2 does also require that all development in Green Belt areas is of the highest quality in terms of siting, scale, design and materials. But obviously there's the overriding requirement to consider context, and what we have here is a relatively modern building, so it would be expected that any extension or alteration would reflect the character and style of the original property. Policy NE5 relating to trees and woodlands sets out a general presumption against development that would result in the loss of or damage to trees and woodlands that contribute to nature conservation, landscape character, local amenity, or climate change adaptation and mitigation. It's for members to consider to what extent you feel these trees specifically make a meaningful contribution in any of those areas. Buildings and services should be cited so as to minimise adverse impacts on existing and future trees. Measures should be taken for the protection and long-term management of existing trees and new planting, both during and after construction. As we saw from earlier slides, there is tree protection fencing shown, as well as the sort of geotextile surface to be laid down in the areas where construction activity would take place. Applications affecting trees are required to include details of tree protection measures and compensatory planting. In this case, we've heard, of course, that there's no trees to be directly removed to facilitate development. What's the issue really is the impact on their longer term health and viability. Policy NE8 sets out the need for appropriate ecological surveys where development may affect protected species or other environmental designations. In this case, the applicants provided a bat survey along with the application. That concluded that the existing buildings did not provide opportunities for roosting, and no roosts were identified when that survey was undertaken. So you'll see, of course, that the officer concluded that the proposal would comply with policy NE8. Policy D1 relating to quality placemaking by design requires development to be of a high standard of design which demonstrates an understanding of its context and links to the 6 essential qualities of good placemaking listed here. Turning then to the relevant supplementary guidance, that's the Householder Development Guide. First, that sets out a number of general principles and also includes some specific criteria on outbuildings, which we've sort of heard in the last case, so apologies for the repetition. In terms of general principles, development should be architecturally compatible with the original house and surrounding area in terms of design, scale and materials. Should not dominate or overwhelm the original house and should remain visually subservient. Extension should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected. We've seen here that the property is set within a generous plot and is at least 50 metres away from the nearest property. Approvals predating this guidance do not represent a precedent, and no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage should be covered by development. Again, the generous plot sort of takes care of that. The maximum size of extensions to detached properties will be assessed on individual merit, so there's no maximum projection from the building or anything like that. It really just comes down to context, and on a larger site there's possibly scope for more to be considered acceptable. In terms of outbuildings, the specific criteria include that outbuildings must always be subordinate in scale to the dwelling, and 2-storey outbuildings will generally not be permitted. In this case, we saw that the extension to the existing garage is quite low slung. What's the issue is perhaps the overall cumulative footprint of that in the officer's report. Where a second storey is to be accommodated within pitched roof space, buildings should retain the impression of being single storey in height. That's not relevant, of course. There's no upper floor accommodation. Neither is access to upper floors being internal. Outbuildings should not have a negative impact on the character of the surrounding area. Again, matter of judgment for members there about what you feel the character of this particular area is. Where highly visible, and especially in conservation areas, detached garages should be of a scale and design that respects the prevalent context of that surrounding area. It's a judgment there in terms of how visible or sensitive you feel this location is. Proposals will be assessed on their impact, for their impact on amenity, in the same way as extensions. Again, we've noted that this is located at the far northern end of a site, which is a considerable distance away from its nearest neighbours. Outbuildings will not usually be acceptable in front gardens. In terms of this site, if I just flick back to the site plan, I mean, it's perhaps arguable that there is no obvious front or back garden. I mean, there's a small area to the rear of the property, but generally it sits in such a large plot it doesn't have that traditional front and back regimented facing the street type layout. So sorry, just find our place again here. Last of all is the Trees and Woodland Supplementary Guidance. This sets out that trees within 15 metres of a site boundary must be shown on plans for household applications, and tree surveys by qualified professionals may be required. And really that's just making the point that it's not just whether there are trees within the application site, because development may affect something which is over the other side of the boundary, as was found to have been the case here. Explains the concept of root protection areas within which encroachment should generally be avoided if trees are to be retained, and the use of protection fencing to avoid damage to root systems during construction. We heard before that mitigation has been proposed by the applicants to try and offset some of that, or not offset, but minimise or mitigate that impact. Explains also the concept of zone of influence, which is aimed at assessing future threat to trees as a result of their proximity to buildings or other development. So just points for consideration in coming to your conclusion, members. Firstly, zoning. Do you feel this development is of a type which is supported in principle within greenbelt areas? In terms of design quality, do you feel like this is of sufficient design quality for its context as required by policy D1, having regard to factors such as scale, siting, footprint, proportions relative to the original property, materials, colour, that sort of thing? Does the proposal satisfy the requirements of policy NE2 as regards development being of the highest quality and in terms of siting, scale, design and materials? And also, does it accord with the general principles set out in the Householder Development Guide as regards outbuildings? In terms of trees, is the proposal consistent with policy NE5's requirements for the protection of existing trees to allow and allowing for future growth, bearing in mind the mitigation measures put forward by the applicant, of course? And in terms of green space network, would the proposal destroy or erode the character or function of that wider area of green space network? So ultimately, does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole? Are there any material considerations out with the development plan that weigh either for or against the proposal, and are those of sufficient weight to outweigh any conflict with the plan? Happy to assist with any questions members have, or if any conditions are required in the event of this being reversed. Just hand back to you there, convener. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. And Councillor Bell was straight up with his hand, so I'll take him first. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Can I just clarify this the tree survey and the tree protection and management drawing? So can we look at page 172 of the pack, please?
Apologies, sorry, I was just finding that page in the agenda pack because I've got my presentation separately from the agenda pack, so it needs a bit of tinkering around.
Okay,
just share,
to clarify that, that's the drawing that shows the area. Yeah, that's the drawing. So the first question is, I can see 8 trees there. However, mentioned in the document are 5 mature trees and 7 of significant influence. So that makes 12.
I think what's being referred to there, I don't think that's counting up to 12. I think it's talking about the relationship in terms of 2 different things. So I think there are 5 that are affected in one capacity and 7 affected in another capacity. I would need to find the specific mention of that part here. Yes, so the 5 mature beech trees that it refers to being affected, that's with respect to their root protection area. And then the 7... Yeah, I think the word further may be erroneous there, Councillor Bell, because that does give the impression of over and above those first 5. But I don't think that's the case. I think we're just talking about zone of influence and root protection areas, which are 2 different measurements.
Okay, and there's a, so the proposal is to have a cellular confinement system. So I'm just trying to pick out so it's 7 that will be significantly influenced with this cellular confinement system in place, is it?
So there's 5 that are referred to as being affected in terms of their root protection area. The root protection area is the line indicated in blue there, yeah. And the zone of influence is a much larger area, or can be a much larger area, which is why the number of trees affected with respect to the zone of influence would normally be larger.
Right. So so would it not be the root system that would be of concern? I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, the root system would be affected by excavation and construction work. So there's the footprint of the building, but as I mentioned, obviously you have to get in to construct the building as well, which is where the use of tree protection fencing and these sort of geotextile grids to spread loads in the sort of identified construction area is used as a means of mitigating that impact. So what's shown in this sort of light pink area here by the applicant is the extent of the encroachment within the root protection area. So that would be for trees 5, 6 and 7, I think. And then the geotextile is used as a means of sort of protecting the roots where construction activity is taking place within that area. Whereas the zone of influence, which is shown on the earlier plan here, is more to do with a sort of hypothetical perception of risk. You know, it's a less physical impact or less direct physical impact on the tree. It's more to do with the siting of buildings relative to existing trees and how that might result in them being perceived as a threat, whether that measurement of zone of influence is supposed to allow for, you know, ultimate height future growth, for example, because if you're talking about a relatively immature tree, there could obviously be considerable scope for growth, and that measurement's intended to try and capture, you know, the full extent of the relationship between trees and buildings in the long term.
Right. So can I ask then that the 5 mature trees, so which are they? I suppose we're then going to look at another set of drawings, don't we? It's very hard to combine, you know, to actually combine this information as it's presented.
Yeah. The 5 mature beech trees in terms of the root protection area. So if we look at the root protection areas, yeah, I mean, it is quite hard to read.
Yeah.
I mean, the short answer I would provide is the ones closest to the works.
Okay. One's closest to the works, right.
It looks like somebody's been at it with a spirograph.
Yeah, but
it's not terribly easy to interpret.
Okay, so but the ones closest to the development though, so is that the root protection area, the tree canopy? They're different. For a layman, I would say root protection area, but you know.
I'm not sure what the question is, Councillor Bell. I mean, the trees closest to the works are most likely to be affected by the development. The root protection area and the canopy for a given tree is sort of related. So,
right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Have you got some more questions, Councillor Bell?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Councillor Mackenzie, have you any questions for Mr. Evans?
No, thank you.
Mr. Evans, can I get you to go back to the photographs of the development or extension house? Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to get an indication of what exists. Have you got? Can you do that aerial kind of one that you had? That was quite useful. It's over there.
It's quite zoomed out.
Yeah. And the comments that came back from Transport Scotland. Can we just have a look at those, please?
Those are available on the portal. They're not actually in the agenda pack, I don't think. We can't contain everything within the agenda pack.
No, I appreciate.
I'll see if I can get that up.
Mm-hmm.
Need to refresh.
It's just that we're all looking at the same thing. It's just that's the only reason I wanted it up.
So that's dated 29th of October. There were two. I just want to make sure I look at them in order. Yeah, so first is this one.
Let's see. Okay, thanks. Presented. Okay, so they're suggesting that it would be a danger to the current house. Just on that last. Is that what
No, I don't think they're saying that. They're disputing an assertion made by the applicants that the council's environmental planner's comments stated that the trees present a danger to the dwelling. I think that's a characterisation from the applicants that Transport Scotland are disputing. They're sort of saying he didn't say that.
it was oddly worded. It was like,
and then the later response.
Okay.
So that's quoting from the council's supplementary guidance on trees, and referring to the point relating to future pressure for removal. The relationship of buildings to large trees can lead to them being perceived as a threat, sort of thing. However, this does not mean that trees should not be retained within any particular distance of a structure. So really, I think what they're getting at there is the fact that there is a conflict or that trees might be perceived as a threat doesn't mean that the owners of that property would be obliged to seek their removal, or that the owners of the trees would be obliged to remove them. It's more just that there is a perception of risk, and if those are controlled by the same people, then it can lead to their removal if it's not otherwise controlled by the planning authority.
Yeah, no, it was just a bit sort of, it's a typical government letter in terms of doesn't sort of says one thing and then kind of goes on to something else. But so that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Okay, could we go back to just the pictures of what currently exists, the photographs, sorry. Just another
So we don't have photographs of the house itself, really. It's more just of the garage and the area of works to the rear or to the side of the house.
In terms of the mitigation, there was the suggestion of that sort of spread map thing, whatever it's called. Was there any suggestion of hand digging, or you know, for the actual construction phase?
Sorry, was there any suggestion of
hand digging around any sort of particular areas of the construction? I'm just aware that we had a similar situation on Peterhouse Road where part of the conditions to allow it to happen was about hand digging, but those trees were far closer. So
yeah, I don't believe that was something that was put forward. No.
Okay. Yeah. Can we look at now the design picture again? The actual design.
The visualizations?
Yes. Best? I'm just trying to get my brain to work with the photographs and visualization. So where the garage currently exists, it remains in place. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And then so the extension's to its side, and the house extension is going towards the garage. Is that right?
Pretty much. If I show the site plan, yeah, it goes towards the side wall of the garage. Yeah.
Okay. And I noticed there's like some. Is it the I don't know if it's like a septic tank or something there?
Yeah, there is. The applicants have indicated that they would intend to re-site that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was just trying to get it clear in my head from the photograph how far over that is going. It's quite difficult sometimes seeing it on. Now they've obviously got circles which relate to trees there, which obviously is far fewer circles than indicated on the other one that came, I assume that came from us, because they're suggesting there's only like a tiny corner of one building that seems to impact.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is supposed to refer to canopy or anything. This is just an excerpt I've taken from the submitted plan.
Yeah.
But I mean, the tree survey drawings would be your point of reference really for the detail of relationship between trees and property.
This is actually quite. I know it sounds. It's quite a difficult one because I have an issue with the zone of influence, because my concern if we focus too much on the zone of influence, we could see a whole load of trees disappear around the city. If you look at how many trees we have in our city and potential development, and my fear of that is always that people will go in and clear fell things in advance of putting any submission for application. So I'm always wary of putting too much. I know it's part of the national policies, but you know, I know it's well intended, but I think it could have adverse impact rather than helpful. I am very conscious of the sort of roots protection area, and that's why I was asking about hand digging. I'm just trying to understand really the real implications and impact on the root, because you know, I think we have to be very mindful to start impacting on the roots. Having said that, I'm looking out my window and I've got trees virtually in my house. They're so close, they're large, and I wouldn't think they're knocking them down at all. But it's just, as you say, it's a construction work as well, the impact that might have, because you've already got an existing situation. And I appreciate it's in a larger, if you like, forestation area. But however, there seems to be almost like a line of trees that obscures this house. And if I'm getting my bearings right, Mr. Evans, is this then kind of project like that line between the house and the trees is then after that's the AWPR, is that right?
No, the AWPR is really over to the east of the site.
You can see I'm rubbish. Never give me a map, I'll tell you.
So the trees we're talking about are really up here. So the AWPR is more over in the other direction. Well, not the other direction, but over to the east.
So that's actually really helpful to understand, because again, it was just trying to get that orientation of the actual development.
The aerial photo in this one probably shows that best. So, you know, we're talking about ones immediately up against the boundary, but as you say, they are part of a wider sort of belt that exists. It's quite thick there.
And how many trees are we actually talking about? It's 5 that's got the sort of immediate danger, is that correct?
5 in terms of the encroachment and root protection area, and I think it was 7 in terms of encroachment into zone of influence. Yeah, that's right.
And we think we've established that 5 is part of the 7.
Yes, yeah, I think it would have to be.
Yeah.
I think it's just worded a little, unfortunately.
Well, I think you'll have to go and become an arboriculturalist as well, Gavin, because we've had 2 that's been on trees today. Okay. Right. I think I've asked all the questions I need to ask, because I think that the crux of the application does rest on the trees and whether we believe there's sufficient mitigation or threat. Okay, if we can move on then, unless there's any other questions. Councillor Bell, is there anything further from yourself?
No, whilst you've been talking, I've actually been doing some research on the cellular confinement system, so I've got a bit more of an idea now. So no, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mackenzie?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, right. I'll obviously, if we've asked all our questions, obviously we need now to make a determination on this application. So if I could pass over Councillor Bell, if you'd like to give us your deliberations on this.
Yes, I'll give my deliberations. So so as I said, I've just been doing some research on this, and it seems to me, and from what Mr. Evans was saying as well, the trees could potentially encroach or could potentially damage the structure of this building in time, and hence the reason for the cellular confinement system. I noticed that tree number 5 in that protection scheme actually falls out with the extent of the cellular confinement system. And I'm wondering if we could put a condition on actually increasing the system to actually ensure full protection, to such that a tree won't have to be pulled down, number 5, in the event of it structurally undermining the I think it's the garage shown there. Sorry, was that
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you were saying. If you wanted the area of protection expanded, or that
yes,
cellular,
absolutely.
is that what you meant? I thought you were suggesting we chop the tree down. I wasn't quite sure.
No. So I think it's tree number 5, shown on page 172 of the pack.
I'll just share an image here, Councillor Bell, if that helps.
Yes, that'd be good.
So we're talking about this tree here.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So the cellular confinement system is in this orange area, and where were you suggesting that it might be extended to?
That it could. So there's actually there's a gap just to the by the garage. You see, if you go over to the left of that protection system, sorry, to the right, I don't know my left and my right. Yes, there. Right. So it seems to me that tree number 5 would actually encroach on that area potentially.
This is the footprint of the existing garage.
Right. So yeah, okay, fine.
So we can't put it in retrospectively. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it, Mr. Evans?
Yeah, the cellular confinement system that's being proposed here, my understanding was that was to be used to facilitate access around the footprint of the building during the construction.
I thought it was to actually protect these, this tree, well, when the roots, when they're actually growing, to prevent structurally undermining the building.
Okay, I see.
In time, as these trees actually grow, so in time, if they did that, the tree would have to come down.
Oh, not necessarily. That's what we've got to determine.
Well, that's what I'm presuming. Yeah.
Just check this submission. Just going to quickly check the tree survey and see exactly what that was saying.
Thanks.
So cellular confinement system will be installed out with the foundation line as shown on, it gives a plan reference. This will protect the root plates of trees 3 and 4 during the construction of the house extension. Cellular confinement system will be laid down over the root protection areas of the trees to protect the tree roots during construction. A tree protection fence will be erected to prevent any incursion into the root protection areas during construction. And the relocated oil tank would also be located on a no-dig cellular confinement system laid on the grass surface.
Because the grass would then grow through it, is that correct? That cellular, because I had a look at it once. I remember an application where somebody was putting a driveway and they had to put down this cellular stuff which spreads the weight across the actual roots. It stays in place after the construction of the driveway or whatever. So I think that's what Councillor Bell and myself were just needing clarity on.
Yeah, I think you can use these cellular confinement systems in different ways. It can either be a temporary feature during construction to spread weight around the root systems and minimise impact, or it can be a permanent feature, which I think is what Councillor Bell's suggesting, where it's intended to prevent the spread of the root systems in a particular direction where it might have a future effect on buildings, and that doesn't appear to be what's being proposed here, other than with respect to the recited what's it, an oil store?
Yeah.
So post construction, the areas shown in orange around the proposed extension and carport and garden room would be removed. Those aren't a permanent feature. That's what I'm taking from the tree survey report.
Could that be a condition, Gavin? I think that's probably your next question, isn't it?
It potentially could be if there was a legitimate need for it. It would need to satisfy the sort of test for conditions, and I would probably be minded to get some further input from our environmental colleagues before we would be satisfied that that's absolutely essential or not, because I don't feel qualified to say if it is or not.
Yeah. If that is required, Councillor Bell, because clearly if you're wanting, if part of your decision it's going to be based on whether you can protect the roots ongoing rather than just during construction phase, what we could do is defer the final decision and let Mr. Evans go away and get further clarity on that, and we could resume this meeting on another day and time that would be convenient for everyone. Would you want us to do that?
Or could we just caveat it and just make it a condition such that when expert advice is being sought, if the advice says to retain this cellular system, then that is part of the planning condition. If it says it doesn't matter, then that would be it.
I'm not sure we can. Gavin, do you want to come back in? I think we would probably have to stop.
Well, I mean, if members were minded to reverse the decision and grant planning permission, it might be an option to apply a condition requiring, further agreement with the planning authority of the extent of any tree protection measures during the construction phase. You could argue that might extend beyond the construction phase in terms of what you're suggesting, Councillor Bell. So it's maybe just about how we frame that condition so that it gives the planning authority, and by extension our environmental policy colleagues who are qualified in this area specifically, to get a further look at it and to say, well, the LRB's determined that planning permission is going to be granted here. So in terms of the best practice for protecting the root systems, both during construction and in the long term, we can take appropriate advice at that point. That would seem like it would make sense.
I think that's probably where we're both coming from, isn't it, Councillor Bell? I think it's just about the construction, it's about the ongoing. And I don't think, and I'm putting words in your mouth, Councillor Bell, apologies, but it's not so much, as I say, the zone of influence, but it really is about the root protection. I think that we're both majorly concerned. So it's just I suppose what we're maybe saying is, if they're saying there's no way that we can have a level of mitigation, we know that you can never have everything 100%, but if we felt that there was a suitable methodology in terms of build that would give a greater protection for these trees, because I mean these trees could suddenly get some light and die, so we can never guarantee trees forever, but if there's a way of protecting it, longevity with a certain level of mitigation through not just the construction but the ongoing use of the site, we would like to investigate that. But I suppose we're both just a bit nervous. Sorry, I'm speaking for you, but I'm just reading between the lines of what you've said, that if we said yes, we're happy for it to go ahead, but I think what we're saying is we would be content for it to go ahead, but we would want a bit more reassurance around what could be put in place in terms of protecting the roots first.
Yes, that's
what you're saying.
Summary of what I'm saying.
We obviously work too closely, Councillor Bell, and we can read each other's minds out, it's a bit of a worry. But I think that's both. I don't know about Councillor Mackenzie, if you've got similar concerns, or if you're maybe not concerned and would rather just uphold. So really, if you would like to give us a little bit of an indication, might be.
I was about to send you a message because I'm concerned about the protection of the trees as well.
Mm-hmm. I think, Gavin, to be fair, I think that the level of nervousness that we have, I think it may be more sensible if we could maybe have asked you to maybe seek a little bit more information in terms of what mitigation and, or again, I suppose we could be guided by you if you feel there's a condition that can be put on that would adequately address our concerns. I think we're minded that we can see the merits of the application, but we are very concerned about the tree roots rather than the zone of influence. So it's just whether there's measures that can be put in place. I say I'm aware of others where we have taken measures, but because I'm just looking for guidance.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the conclusion that yourself and Councillor Bell have come to is that you're potentially comfortable with the principle, but you feel you need further input from the arboricultural side to have total comfort. And the two options available to us would be to defer and get that advice before we make a decision on the principle, or to accept the principle and then leave it to the Council's arboriculturalist advising planning staff to come to a view on, having accepted that principle, what's the best means of mitigating the impact. So it's just a question if you want to do option A or option B, I suppose.
Councillor Bell, I've spoken enough. Let's hear from you.
I was going to say I'll take your guidance. I'm thinking about it. So I had a lot more confidence in what was going on. It would be a question of, I think, actually getting more information from our arboriculturalist, and then perhaps reconvening and making a final decision, because I'm not entirely sure that that other factors couldn't influence, this caveat, as it were. So it would be good for us, I think, to reconvene when we want, the specific technical information on trees.
Yeah, if we could find out what mitigations potentially could satisfy us in terms of protecting the roots going forward. I mean, they may turn around and say, well, they don't think there's anything sufficient that will. I mean, as I say, we're not looking for 100%, but we are aware of other builds where certain construction methodology have been accepted that have protected the roots going forward. So it's just really, I think, around that, Gavin, would be really helpful. I mean, even if they want to come and speak on the LRB, just give you the level of specialist support, we're happy for that to take place. So if we're all in agreement, we can finish for now, or pause the meeting for now and come back once, Gavin, you've managed to get that piece of information, and Lindsay will rearrange a follow-up or a continuation of this meeting.
Yep, that's fine from my point of view.
Okay, Karen, are you comfortable from legal?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, as I say, I know that this should be kind of straightforward enough, but we're trying to give, I suppose, justice to both sides, and we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. So, thank you all for attending today. I think it's been it's been quite a long meeting for everyone. I had somebody pop up on the screen that was sitting in a meeting waiting for me at 12 o'clock. It was, thankfully, I told them I'll have to reschedule, but thank you all, and we'll come back again to determine this final part of the application. And hopefully I won't be